I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to the Positivity Matters podcast. www.positivitymatters.org. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or YouTube. Here on the Positivity Matters podcast, we engage in conversations with scholars and community builders and focus on well-being, positive psychology, and human flourishing. Today, our guest is Professor Bruce Smith from the University of New Mexico, Albuquerque. Professor Smith, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
How did that come to be that you are teaching positive psychology at a university?
Well, I was fortunate to get into psychology at a good time. You know, some of the history of psychology, even though a lot of psychology research is funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, would often talk about it. Maybe it should be called the National Institutes of Illness, because it really focused on people who were already ill and how to make them better. And psychology had done a lot of the same thing. It focused most of all on things like reducing anxiety and depression and some of the problems that we get into, some of the psychological disorders and mental illness, which is important, but it really neglected the other side. How, in spite of our illnesses and stresses, how can we all move towards a better life for ourselves? And researchers started to look at this in the last quarter of the 20th century, but it wasn't a really big thing. And near the year 2000, Martin Seligman, who made his career, some people had remembered he had done research on what was called learned helplessness, how people learn to be depressed and helpless in their lives. By the time he was elected president in 1998, he was looking for a focus for his presidency, and he started getting people offering him money to focus on kind of the positive aspects of life. How can we become better? You know, what are our strengths? What about positive experience and emotions? And so there was a lot of excitement around the turn of the century when he started what is called the positive psychology movement. And that's just about the time when I was graduating, getting through my education at Arizona State University, getting my PhD. I worked with a guy who focused a lot on resilience, which is something that people started looking at back in the 80s, particularly with kids. Why is it that some kids are able to grow up to do pretty well, even though they have really stressful childhoods? I was studying resilience in relation to different problems like chronic pain. I studied how people cope with the Oklahoma City bombing, a flood, earthquake in Pakistan, and but when I started teaching this class called positive psychology, I began to see that the things that we talked about, such as human strengths and happiness and well-being, not in a simple uh, idea of pleasure, but in terms of things like meaning and accomplishment, how much that really started to transform students' lives. And it was students who even were struggling with things like anxiety, depression, physical health problems, and to see that once we start aspiring to a better life and understanding what that is in terms of not only happiness but meaning and purpose, that I could see just how big of an effect it had. And so even though I had all of this research training, I became to just develop a deeper and deeper love for how positive psychology can transform people's lives and focusing on kind of the whole person. So that was a big question you asked me, and it was a big answer. So too long of an answer, but um, it's just a wonderful area to be able to work in, and it's great because it's something that we all we all desire, we all seek to have a better life for ourselves. And now we can really focus on that from a scientific perspective.
Within the field, I believe I saw that your other emphasis is on this notion of the hero's journey. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
So I think the hero's journey is a by Joseph Campbell. His idea was something that is a wonderful insight on something that we all have in common in humans as humans. You know, he studied all of these stories from cultures around the world, and some movies took up his ideas and they made movies around them, such as Star Wars and The Lion King. And it's the idea that all of us are on these various iterations of this hero's journey where we're trying to move towards a life that brings us more happiness, more joy, more meaning, more fulfillment. And we have common things that happen. We need to connect with other people. You know, we feel like, you know, we can't cope with this. So we have to learn new ways to be able to deal with things. We face really big challenges. And if we stay with it, we can get to the other side where we can not only survive the challenges, but become a better person. We can gain things to be able to give to other people. And so when I teach in positive psychology, when I work with people, I find that that idea really kind of helps us to see how we're all on a common journey. I love the saying that be kind, everyone is fighting a great battle. And I think that great battle is represented very well by that journey, that whatever it is, that we kind of have this common desire to be able to move forward in our lives. And positive psychology is showing that a lot of that doesn't just have to do with ourselves, but has to do with really being connected with other people and feeling like we do things that benefit others as well as ourselves. So I think it's a powerful, powerful idea that brings people beyond, you know, stories of Harry Potter and Star Wars, and shows us that those stories really come to life in our own lives, and they come from our own lives.
You're reminding me of a movie I saw once called The Never Ending Story. I believe it was one of those 80s movies. And in the story, there's a child that starts to read a book. He's chased into a abandoned school by bullies, and he finds himself in the attic of the place, and he's evaded the bullies, and he's discovered this book, and he starts to read it, and he gets drawn into it. And the way that the story unfolds, you start seeing this journey that's he's reading about in the book taking place. And eventually, though, it comes to a point where he realizes that he is himself has been drawn into the story, and the world in the story is coming to a tragic conclusion, and there's like a kernel left of this world that's entrusted to him, and it's like, here is your opportunity to become the world creator, the storyteller, and not just the story listener.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful expression of just what happens. You realize that, you know, when that hero in that story is doing that thing, it's really a reflection of your own experience, and it brings it back to us that, you know, it's up to us to be able to make some of the choices to make the world a better place. We're in the midst of that journey right now.
And it seems like the two interests there, the hero's journey and the resilience, they really resonate well together, because it's not just a virtuous upward spiral the whole time as we go about our journey. Uh, there might be setbacks, perhaps, for many, if not all. And
I
so
think
the
I think that's one of the great dangers of anything that has the word positive in it, like positive psychology or positive thinking, is to neglect, deny, or ignore the fact that sometimes we feel like we don't know what the hell to do. We're right in the midst of a really, really challenging situation. It's hard for us to even think about being happy, but not only this idea of resilience is important for that, but there's this very powerful new idea that's called post-traumatic growth, which is kind of the opposite of post-traumatic stress. So you know that we can have a traumatic reaction from difficult things that happen, but we can also grow from them as well. So I think, yeah, if we're gonna talk about moving towards a happier life, we have to confront the reality that sometimes we suffer and sometimes we face very great challenges.
That is a good combination. I believe I saw that recently your university hosted the Western Positive Psychology Association conference. Tell us about that and what happened.
Well, it was a wonderful experience. This grew out of the Martin Seligman's work, and you might know Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's a person who studied the experience of flow. And so we had the first conference that was outside of California where it was founded, and we had a couple hundred people there. And we had a person, Bill Miller, who's done great work for people recovering from substance abuse problems on something called motivational interviewing. He talked about hope, all the things we know about hope. We had Sonia Lubomirsky, who talked about the cutting edge research on just what makes us happy, what can make us happier. And we had lots of other presenters as well. And what I find is that whenever you get people together who are kind of wanting to be able to move forward in their lives, improve their happiness and well-being, it has this kind of marvelous contagious effect, in a positive way. We were talking earlier about how generosity can be contagious, but being around other people who you just have this common commitment to moving forward in your lives is just a great experience. And so that was my experience, and that's what it was wonderful to bring more people kind of into that community because if you pay much attention to the news or social media, like all of us do, you realize that sometimes people get really sidetracked on all the kind of the worst things that are happening around us. And a gathering or a conference like that can really bring us home.
I love hearing about that. I believe somewhere I also saw mention of a Center for Applied Positive Psychology. What
Yeah.
is that?
We are the Western Positive Psychology Association. We have the Center for Applied Positive Psychology. This is just an informal organization that was kind of formed in New Mexico by not only educators or psychologists, but by people in all different kind of walks of life and all different professions, business, science, sports, who want to benefit from the latest research on what it is that can enable us to be happy, successful, to be at our best. So we meet once a week on Zoom and talk about how we can support each other in using positive psychology. And we oftentimes have other people join us who want to learn more. And so we kind of consult with them and try to freely share what we've learned so that they can apply it whatever setting that they have. So the application is kind of the most important part. So that's what we see in common. But a lot of these things we're talking about, it's amazing how, like the hero's journey, they generalize to so many different people and situations.
You mentioned sort of an informal organization, and my ears perked up at that. And from last week, we had a guest on the show that was speaking about asset-based community development. And in that process, there's a phase where you get down to the individual level on a city block or a community block of the neighborhood, asking people about their individual gifts they'd be willing to share, and then a slightly more macro focus, maybe it's a meso focus is to inventory the informal organizations in the community
Mm.
and to see, aside from the direct thing that they do, if there's other ways in which they might be of service to the community. And they eventually get a sort of a map of
Mm.
the individual strengths, the various levels of collective strengths and possibilities, and they eventually use that as a reference point when they decide to go forward and think about positive changes that might be able to be made in the community. And so this sounds like one of those that is probably particularly generative, where the focus itself is on well-being. So
Right.
that just
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I hadn't heard of it that way before in the way that you said, Nick. But to be able, because I think if you start with what people want to do and know that they can do, and then you have that map, like you said, then they're going to be much more motivated and much more engaged. I do something similar with students where I have a class of about 20 students. They take this questionnaire about their strengths, they identify their top strengths, and we have a magnet board where they actually put a picture, they put magnets with their faces on them where their top strengths are. So we just by looking at this board, we can see how many people have courage or wisdom. So if we're trying to do some kind of a task, we kind of know how to work together and how to complement each other.
I like that. Now with the strengths focus there, the Values in Action Institute and the University of Pennsylvania have a free version of a strengths finder. There's a great one that takes a little bit of a chunk of change from the Gallup organization. Um, and I was wondering if any of the strengths from either of those, if any of them jump out to you for yourself, perhaps, and if some of those stand out to you, how do you see them playing out through the work that you do?
It's a great question. We really use the values and action classification of strengths. And I know the Gallup is also very well developed and used. What I like about the values and action, it was developed to be more cross-cultural and universal across time. And so I always have my students take that survey, and they do exercises where they try to practice using their strengths. For me, my top strengths, I'll probably remember 3 or 4 out of 5: authenticity, leadership, creativity, love, and spirituality. So I guess I did get all 5. So those are big ones for me. The spirituality, I see the central part of my spirituality is kind of meaning and purpose. And so I find great meaning and purpose through basically being able to make available to students and people who need it this information about how they can move forward in their lives. That involves leadership in terms of teaching and working with students. It involves creativity, and the way that I experience creativity really is to be open to the ideas of others, to learn from what my students tell me and from their own experience. Authenticity, I think, is really, really important when you're talking about happiness or well-being, because there's a lot of people who are trying to sell us how to be happy, but sometimes aren't always honest or authentic about how sometimes, as we said before, that we experience stress and we suffer. And so it makes a big difference, I think, if you're really honest with yourself and other people when you're talking about something like well-being. And for me, when you talk about that other strength of love, you need to be really careful about how you define it. Not talking about kind of romantic love, but talking about kind of a higher form of love you see expressed in some of the world religions, and which has to do with kind of being willing to have compassion and give yourself to other people, and also have compassion for yourself. And I guess for me, that's probably the central meaning in what I do, is trying to make that more available to other people.
And if you're interested in this Strengths Finder, you can find that at www.authentichappiness.sas.upenn, that's UPENN.edu. authentichappiness.sas.upenn.edu.
And it's free, and it'll give you a list of what strengths out of 24 strengths, kind of what you see as your top five, as well as the lower down. And the idea is that oftentimes we focus on kind of improving our weaknesses, but one of the best metaphors I've heard that I use with my classes about this is, if you think about yourself like a sailboat, working on your weaknesses is kind of like plugging the holes in your boat. If you don't do that, you might sink, but working on your strengths is kind of like lifting the sails. And so if you don't lift the sails, then you may not really get to places in your life that are meaningful and bring you joy and meaning and fulfillment. And the other thing about using your strengths and lifting the sails is that it's a lot more fun and enjoyable, and it kind of puts you in those experiences of flow or being in the zone. And oftentimes, knowing that you can use those strengths helps you deal with the weaknesses, or accept the things that are hard to change about yourself.
Yeah, that's an, another idea that I've been reflecting on around strengths is if we are aware of the goodness of all 24 strengths, but our energy and satisfaction really comes most from focusing on our top five strengths. And we know that like friendship is such a central good to the life well lived. My I've been having this thought, something along the lines of maybe there's sort of a being the wind beneath someone else's wings for when there's a recognition like, yeah, I'd like to grow in this way, and it's like maybe those aren't my top strengths, but maybe they're your top strengths, and like your energy in expressing and living those strengths might be a boon to my own journey in developing some of those other areas. And when you're enthusiastic about it and have that energy to do it, it's like that's maybe a little bit of motivation to spare for the other person. And that this mindfulness of strengths might be able to be a basis around which friendships could be developed, perhaps.
I think that there's something called strength spotting that is used when talking about these 24 strengths, where we can get better and better at really just knowing the words. But as we see the strengths in ourselves and as we see them in other people, if we can identify them, if we can name them, one exercise that a lot of my students have enjoyed is called the best reflected self, where you take a list of these 24 strengths and brief definitions. You give that list to 4 or 5 of your closest friends or family members, and then they check off the top 5 or 7 that they see for you. And it often starts this wonderful dialogue where you kind of see, okay, well, maybe you have that sense of humor that I don't have. You can help me when I'm stressed out, but I have that ability to control myself in a difficult situation that you can rely on there. So you can really open up a dialogue about how we can really benefit each other in these strengths.
Yeah, it's amazing, like all the different practices that have developed around the strengths. For myself, it was a transformative experience, and it was my introduction to positive psychology. For I'm starting to realize now a little bit of the why behind this. Having been somewhat recently diagnosed with ADHD, one of the things that I've heard about this is that the we have a overactive default mode network, and this tendency to ruminate or to look forward into the future. Sometimes when work needs to be done, our brains don't shut off that tendency to the imagination does not shut off. And so
Yeah.
unfortunately, the sort of the negative rumination about perhaps mistakes of the past tends to be a feature of how it typically expresses. And I found myself going through the early part of life where that was just sort of a constant sort of mental occurrence. It was just always dwelling on the negative. And this Strengths Finder, when I heard it, was really a source of great hope because it started to give me a perspective on being able to see good things about myself. And I think that that sort of negative self-reflection had translated into sort of a somewhat of cynicism looking out into the world. And it helped me to then also see the positive potential in others. And then I had found myself n not very engaged as I'd gone through the academic experience myself. And this whole field sort of opened up as something that was incredibly fascinating and interesting and engaged my attention.
Mm.
And like I think it's been a very sort of therapeutic activity, not knowing that that's the kind of thing that is good for one to do when one has ADHD. So it's yeah, it's sort of been I think a very essential part to my journey. And to hear the work that's being done with it, I I know that that's something that's not always known, in childhood about that. So my guess is that by doing the work that you do, that that's probably maybe having a similar effect for students that might have that the ADHD brain and helping them to get on a much better path than they might have otherwise. So,
I think there's a couple of things there that really that I wanted to comment on. One is that, we've found that humans have this negativity bias in ourselves that helped us survive. We pay attention to those things that might kill us or might be most threatening, but we often miss the positive aspects of things. And positive psychology helps with that, with helping us identify our strengths and be able to notice and be grateful for the good things around us. The other thing is, as you think about ADHD, there's a beautiful TED talk I show in class. It's called How School Can Kill Creativity by John Robinson, where he talks about a young woman who they thought she couldn't sit still in class. They thought she couldn't learn. And they took her in to see a psychologist, and the psychologist said, like, you don't really have a disorder or a problem. You are a dancer. You need to be a part of a class where you're able to move. And this young woman became was Gillian Lynn, who wrote many Oscar-winning, many Broadway plays such as Cats, became very famous. And a lot of my students can really relate to that. And I think because oftentimes when we teach in a school, it's in a large room with all these people, and everybody has to do things the same way. But some people have to move to learn. And some people they are more creative, but they're not going to be more creative if they just have to focus on one thing all the time. So I think in many ways, he said that that person would probably have been diagnosed with ADHD now, but she went on to really do something probably better than almost anyone else could do because she learned a different way.
I like that example. At some point in life, I found partner dancing, and that was another incredibly absorbing
Yes,
experience.
yes,
And
yes.
I
Yeah.
think for the finding something that's of interest basically is the necessary thing, especially for the ADHD brain, in that a normal brain, if they understand there's work to be done, it has a much easier time like buckling down and doing the work and focusing. Whereas with the ADHD, it has to be like super interesting. And then once that's in place, then when the focus does come in, it's like it goes to, I've heard it described as a hyper focus.
Yeah.
And that was my experience with both positive psychology and with partner dancing. And when when I first discovered it, I got hooked, and I went for I believe one period of time where I found somewhere to go dance or learn how to do all this partner dancing. I went on a 45-day streak in a row of dancing every day
Oh
between
my God.
Lincoln and
Oh
Omaha.
my goodness.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well,
Uh,
that's like that experience that it's one of the founders of positive psychology, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I always tell my students if they can pronounce or spell his name, they get an automatic A. But he basically discovered this experience of flow that a lot of us have when we're doing artwork, anything that we really love to engage in, like dancing for you. And if we can find those experiences, not only will it keep us from being bored and but make us successful and earn money, it just makes life so worthwhile. And like a lot of people I know during COVID, they found new hobbies that they could do. Like for me, it was I was at home. I had a lot of time to. I focused on playing the piano like I hadn't before, and now I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I did find something like that, dancing. And so that experience of flow not only can be something that can bring us lasting happiness, but we can find ways to do things that also benefit the community and benefit other people. So maybe you'll be a great dance instructor in the future, or that people will enjoy your videos.
and that is one of the ways in which I've tried to take that personal interest and turn it into a difference making endeavor. And that is by organizing several nights of social dancing throughout the month here in Lincoln. And we start out with uh, an hour or so of a lesson and then go into several hours of music where people can dance. And
Hmm.
I just do that because I love the dance itself and I love being able to share that. And think of that as sort of a community level positive psychology intervention. So
Hmm.
it's social, playful. There's the beauty of the music. There's like healthy physical touch, and I've I would be hard pressed to think of another uh, activity that a community could engage in that would do more to elevate well-being. Um, and
The
then
movement,
yeah,
the connection, the thoughts, the feelings of the music, the synergy of working together.
yeah. But with that experience of flow, I think for the normal person, it's a just benefit, and then for the ADHD brain, it kind of feels like it's a must have in order to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with this idea of difference making, that seems to be a feature of the hero's journey, in that it's not just about uh, self-actualization and cultivating your own well-being. And I've been reflecting on difference making, and the possible flavors of difference making are infinite, but the the top three to me, I would describe them as compassionate, where the preventing or alleviation of suffering is involved. So maybe like uh, being involved with like a soup kitchen or recovery groups. Playful, so creating play-based experiences for others, so such as partner dance, sports, and the generative, so building up and activating the positive potential in others. mentoring, coaching, etc. And those are dynamics that I think uh, translate over into the nature of like deep friendship itself. And the way that I see that translating over into the nature of friendship would be that when there's two people that are like deep, have a deep friendship, like they might be able to save their friendship. We enjoy each other's company, we have each other's backs, and we bring out the best in each other. And the we enjoy each other's company is like, so the playful experiences that you have in friendship would relate to that. The having each other's backs would be like that preventing or alleviation of suffering, the compassionate element, and then the bringing out the best in each other would be the generative. So it's like, I think there's something to be learned from friendship that can play out into personal and community interventions for the positive side. And that's a little bit of theory there that I have done no empirical. I don't know how to do empirical research, but from a scholarly perspective, like how does that strike you? Does it would that be like a testable hypothesis, perhaps?
Well, that could be a positive effect of what you may describe as ADHD. The idea that, well, maybe on the other hand, you're able to see more, you're able to see different things. You're not focusing on one thing. There's a rich diversity there. Okay. Some people might just get hung up on it's all about just focusing on suffering and taking away the sadness. Well, no, you have the playfulness there. That's really, really important to remember. And then the thing that we get stuck in Western society is we're so focused on the individual. You have the generativity part, where you're building up and activating the positive potential in other people. So I think that maybe an unholy trinity that makes a lot of sense in terms of putting those three together. And I think friendship is one of the most underappreciated, most important things in our lives that we have. And you made this really wonderful link to the community. How can we think about friendship? How can we extend that to a larger community? And you talked about that, I think having opportunities for people to learn and practice partner dancing, one thing, but many ways that could happen.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I think for all of those goods, there's like an infinite number of ways that they can be manifested.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's in terms of creativity. That's the idea of divergent thinking rather than convergent thinking. Is there's only one solution that we all have to find so we can pass the test, whereas divergent thinking is brainstorming, being free to think about as many different ways to do that, and how all of us in our differences are able to add to what we can do together as a community.
Thanks for reflecting with me for a bit on the things that I'm interested in. Tell
Well,
me, yes.
this is what we do in the Center for Applied Positive Psychology, and this is what I think is wonderful to switch the frame. So it's not like, we're kind of sharing with each other, and so we can kind of build upon that. And it's kind of like working with students. I often feel like I learn more from them than they do from me, and so I'm happy to do that, Nick.
Thank you. You mentioned some of the presentations from the Positive Psychology Summit recently. I was wondering if you might be willing to share some recollections of that with regard to, I believe you mentioned hope, and then I believe you mentioned some interventions related to generosity as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the one of the big things I remember from generosity, there's an evolutionary psychology researcher whose name is as Actippus, Athena Actippus at Arizona State University. She's involved in what's called, I think it's the National Generosity. It's a big generosity project. She's one of the co-chairs of that. And she's done this wonderful research where she's going around studying other cultures in the world. And she studied this African tribe where they basically have a way of responding to great need when there's a great need in their community, such there might be a famine or something like that. They rather than given to another person who can give back to them, they basically feel like, well, as long as they can continue to meet their needs, they're going to give whatever they can to help those who have a need in their community. And it's really different than this kind of transactional thing like, okay, I'll give to you if you can give to me in our country, in the West as well. And so it's a really powerful thing. So she's going around trying to create these games. She's written a book about how to deal with an apocalypse, where they're getting young people who are in this generation. Some of them are feeling kind of like the sense of gloom and doom after COVID and after the crisis in the economy. That they're thinking about, okay, well, how do we work together when we have these big problems and crises? And it just seems like these ideas she's gained from some of these other cultures are really, really promising in terms of, if there's somebody suffering around us, then everyone else makes the decision to give what they can to help them. But it also has this idea of caring for yourself, this kind of self-compassion, where you consider yourself. I mean, you don't give so much that you're not able to give anymore. The proverbial metaphor of putting on the oxygen mask in the airplane before you help someone. You want to make sure you have enough, but yet this seems to be a really wonderful community to be a part of when people act in that way, that they I know I've talked with some of you about part of your career in insurance. It's a kind of a mutual insurance policy where they have this common sense of trust and commitment to, if any one of us is in a great need, everyone else is going to be able to give of what they can to help that person get through. And it seems to really work for these people who often have very little in terms of material goods. So that was one really beautiful presentation I saw. I know there was another one that one of my students did about the ideas of hero's journey. What she's doing is she's going to do an intervention for high school students where she takes the idea of these stages of the hero's journey and she teaches young people how to use software to create like a graphic novel or a comic that shows an experience in their life where they had a hero's journey. Like maybe they overcame substance abuse. Maybe they had a really bad breakup. Maybe their parents left them or there was a divorce in their family. So they show this in this little format, and then in a group format, they share these with each other. And then the whole group gets to see how others just like them are able to make it through these really challenging experiences. So another presentation that I thought was really powerful.
And what's the latest on hope research, and what is hope from the psychologist's perspective?
Well, there's a lot of different. Bill talked about different ways of hoping. Bill Miller, he's got a book coming out soon on that, I think in August, and talked about all the things that are related to hope and how hope is almost always. I actually he saw it as something that always is a good thing. One of the big hope researchers in psychology and one of the founders of positive psychology was Rick Snyder, who he used that popular expression, the will and the way. There's a will, where there's a will, there's a way. His idea is that hope is something that we make happen, that we play an active part in. It's not something that's false. It's not something we just wish for. But he says there's both a will, we need to be able to have confidence and a desire to do something to make something we hope for come true. And the other part is the way, or what he calls a pathway. And that's the idea that we need to be able to, when we think about some goal we want to reach, we need to think about, okay, what are we going to do when we have an obstacle or a barrier? Or we want to have different ways to be able to reach that goal when something happens that gets in our way. So those two things seem to be really important for hope. The sense that you are committed, that I can do this, and then that you have different options for being able to do that in your life. So hope seems to be one of the things that it's important to think about. It is something that it's not wishful thinking. It's something that we can play a part in making something happen in our future, and that oftentimes we don't see. Uh, we may not see how we're gonna make it through this difficult thing, but that doesn't mean that there's not hope.
Thank you. And I believe you mentioned Sonia Lyubomirsky as well. What does she have to share?
She talked about a lot of the latest research about what can make us happy. And one of the biggest challenges that she's tried to address in her research is something that's called, this is a technical term, the hedonic treadmill. And the hedonic treadmill is the idea that when we have something really good in our life that happens, we normally are happier for a while, then we go back to where we were. Something bad happens, we kind of go down and we go back to where we are. But the big question is, can we what can we do that can raise our happiness to a higher level, happiness and well-being? And the two main things that she talked about that are particularly powerful are gratitude and kindness. And so kindness being something that not only being kind to people who are friends, but also strangers, being creative, finding new ways to be able to do that. That consistently raises our happiness to a new level. That if we're kind to people who we know, then they're likely to be more kind to us. But then the question is, well, why is it that if we're kind to people we don't know, why would that benefit us? Well, it seems to fit into your ideas about being a difference maker. That when we are kind to people, when we have an effect on people that don't know us, that raises our sense of value and meaning in ourselves, that we have control, that we can make a difference, and that makes us happier ourselves. The other one is gratitude and savoring, which is when you drive a new car off the dealer's lot, you automatically you lose a couple $1,000s, right? Big depreciation. Well, it turns out in our brains and how we think about things, we can make things appreciate in a great way. We can get much more value out of that piece of chocolate, that friendship, sitting with that friend, that sunset, if we take the time and savor that. So that in gratitude. So kindness to others, kindness to ourselves, savoring, focusing more on the good things and spending time with them. Those are the best ways that we know that we can consistently raise our happiness and well-being to a higher level. And that's what she talked about.
Thank you for giving us some insight into the latest workings of positive psychology. I had a few ideas if you might help
Yeah.
me reflect on here. One I'm calling a difference maker generator. And part of my idea with that is to create something that makes positive psychology like a center point around which community can be built. I'm a person in recovery and found some real powerful dynamics from working the 12 steps, and thinking of maybe like a parallel that could potentially invite everybody into it. And what I sort of came to was sort of a parallel of a searching and fearless moral inventory might be doing something like the strengths finder to look at the positive side of it. And then there's a real focus on being of service and So that would be like the difference making part of it. But to really be mindful about aligning your difference making so that it connects with your strengths. I think that might make the difference making more sustainable over time. And then as far as like a dosage goes, there was a Dr. Stephen Post. He, I believe, done some work and found that an hour to 3 hours a week of volunteerism was a conducive to an elevation in subjective well-being. And then like there's meetings where for the recovery groups, like, this might be a little bit overboard, but sometimes when someone's fresh in recovery, they say like, try to get to 90 meetings in 90 days. It's like,
I remember
that,
my brother was had a great experience with AA. Was in recovery for he not too long ago died of brain cancer, sadly,
sorry to
but
hear that.
20 years of recovery are the best parts of his life through his
Mm.
experience with AA.
And was he able to get into the service side of that as well? Did he ever share about any of that?
Yes, yes, he was a sponsor.
Hmm.
He was kind of a naturally a person who gave to others a lot in his life. So I think there was always something. We talked about the ideas of hero's journey. This is so beautifully expressed in AA, whereas the 12th, you give back to other people. And that's really the goal of the hero. That's what comes out of the hero. You have this elixir, this thing to share with other people. And so I think that's a really fits so well for recovery, and I love the idea about the fourth step, not only this fearless and moral inventory of things that you may have done that you have harmed another person or yourself, but also of your strengths and the good things about you, and like you said, just how can I use those to be able to make a difference in the world. And
Yeah.
the 90 days, I think, there's a lot of wisdom to when you're going to make a big transition in your life. It's so hard to get away from old habits. So you can see the wisdom in that, continuing to do that, and it gets you connected with other people who are also on that same journey.
Yeah. And then the connecting with others, the idea that I had would be probably not daily, but maybe at least weekly to meet with others as everyone's on their unique journey of applying their strengths and values into difference making and to be able to share about those experiences with others. And I'd seen some research on conversation itself as um, another mechanism for elevating well-being, and it was along the lines that like sort of the deeper the conversation, and aside just like sort of the exchanging facts and to like start to reflect a little bit into the, well, how and why, and to go a little deeper, that the deeper the conversation goes, the greater the effect on well-being for the participants. And so I wanted to kind of play on that dynamic, which and to bring the content of that back to the strengths, values, and difference making, and see what happens. So
There's a psychologist who wrote a book called "The Highly Sensitive Person" to help people who are more maybe introverted or sensitive about things. She has done some research identifying questions that help people get to a deeper level in their relationship. And when I've worked with students on like a weekly discussion, to have them do what you suggested, sharing some of the ways that they use their strengths or some kind act that they did for another person, and to have them share those experiences, to reflect on them in a certain way, I think is really, really powerful in building a community of difference makers.
so that's the application that I've been thinking about recently. And the the step, maybe if people don't connect with the strengths, to perhaps think of your own values as sort of a center focus. If it's something that's, really important to you, that maybe that's not captured by the Strengths Finder. And then I'd come up with sort of a, like, in having been thinking about well-being for many years myself, I came up with a sort of set of categorizations that one might use to make your way through the research, philosophical or empirical. And the acronym is Happy Life, and it stands for health, aesthetic experience, play, pleasure, yes saying, life, the web of, information, friendship, and engagement. Um, and like, just as a, thinking about how those might play out in one's life, to sort of, in case something's missed by the strengths, to be able to create some values and to draw on those things. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah, I think I like to think about the strengths as kind of a means to an end. Is part of what we can use to be able to achieve some of these things that you have in your happy life. So it's kind of like these all sound like they're kind of like things that are intrinsically rewarding, or things that we want to seek for their own sake. So I think that sounds really great that you're including that. And I like the fact that it's so thorough and comprehensive, because so often, we give our lectures, or we talk about the thing that was important to us, but we miss the fact that it may be something really different for someone else.
yeah, I I tried to be comprehensive about it. Is Are there some of the, it's like what it doesn't address at all really is the, the adversity and the resilience side of the equation. This is just like I like that word that you used. I tried to make a map of the things that are intrinsically good, and it's like there are a
Yeah.
lot of ways that we can get knocked off course.
Yeah.
So it does nothing about how do you get back on course or anything, but
Yeah.
uh, for the upside of the human experience, I'm shooting for something that's comprehensive. So are there any sort of with that in mind, do you see any like big gaps in it, maybe that it just is like leaving out? Like I was trying to, I was thinking about sort of like gratitude, like where does gratitude fall in something like that? And it's, I was kind of thinking about like the gratitude, maybe might be like, so under engagement, I sort of have like mindfulness, like as one type of engagement, perhaps, where it's like you're in your own mental activity, sort of like almost like a parallel to flow, whereas flow, I think, typically is sort of embodied active experience where you lose your sense of self, versus like mindfulness, where there's like either like stepping out of your the stream of consciousness and becoming a sort of an observer in that mental place to yourself, or some forms of mindfulness I've heard are that sort of that reflective nature where you focus on something like gratitude or loving kindness or something along those lines. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm hoping that like engagement might be a broad enough category that those things could be seen as a part of it. But yeah,
Well,
there may be big holes in this somewhere. So
Well, again, I would think I tend to think more about the strengths as kind of a means to an end, and that does include gratitude, and I would include
yeah.
mindfulness under strengths broadly conceived. And these are these are things that kind of encapsulate what we want in our lives, the happy life. I'll go. The other things I would say that you might think about them as strength rather than putting it here, but that's that part of why we talked about resilience and that idea of post-traumatic growth. Those are two that kind of incorporate the idea that sometimes life is hard, sometimes there's suffering or stress. So if you wanted to include that in some way, it could be around those two ideas.
Yeah.
I
I
just think
think
it's important somewhere to acknowledge that, we go through difficult times, but that's really not what you're talking about here. Like, what encompasses the kind of life that is most meaningful and what we seek.
I like your metaphor of looking at life kind of as think of yourself as a boat. And in that, the yes saying element that it's about creating and living our core values. And when we're sort of constructing those values, that we can probably, you know, with some certainty know that there will be adversity in front of us if we're not currently facing adversity. So some of the values should be around, when adversity is a part of our experiences. And so, like, I think that might be another way in which those elements of resilience and post-traumatic growth might be incorporated in terms of, like, maybe you've never heard of post-traumatic growth before, and knowing now that that's an experience that some people have, and knowing that there's research out there, it's like you could maybe by learning about that, that might help you in your own journey, that when the something traumatic is lies in front of you, that maybe that gives you a little more of a hope as you go through it, that although it's not in the moment probably going to do much, that being able to have that perspective, I'm guessing that just knowing about that itself might be a play a role.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Nick, and I think that it's also important to realize that, okay, you know, I'm going through this now. It may be a long time before I really, learn and grow from this in a way that I want to. It may take time, but just knowing that can have hope. And that the other thing I like about the hero's journey idea is that intrinsic to it is the fact that we leave the land that we know to this new land that we don't know what we're doing, and then we face this ordeal, So I think if you frame it that way, I mean, the beautiful thing I think is that so many of us find ways to incorporate this, to experience this happy life, despite the fact that we get cancer, we have trauma, we have substance abuse, we have ADHD, we have all these other things that may feel like barriers or be actual barriers at the time. So I think it's important to acknowledge that's where people live, but I think what you're portraying there is what so often so many of us are able to experience in spite of that, in spite of as the Buddhists would say, the dukkha, talking about there's always going to be some suffering.
Mm, yeah. Well, thank you for reflecting on those things with me here. And how about in your work? What are some ideas that you're exploring? What do you want to be doing in the future?
I've been in this not totally satisfied, gratified place maybe in the last 12 years with teaching. So there's a part of me that's I want to continue to improve and do new things, but there's also a part of me that if it's not broke, don't try to fix it. And so I continue to see so many good things happening with my students, and I just want to be open to them and what I can learn from them and incorporate that into classes. One great example from last semester, as I had one person who was a TA who came from a really difficult background with a lot of violence. And he was able to share part of his story in class in a very real, honest way. And he is basically a way of trying to maybe make amends or deal with his past is to just become the best person he can to other people and just to be able to see how that has an effect on another person. I had another young woman who basically is one of the most naturally loving people that I know. She shared a story about a difficult experience that she had that a lot of young women could relate to. It was just so empowering. So I think part of what we're doing is not trying to say that we have the knowledge, but how can we ask questions and approach people in ways that help them to see that within themselves so that they can share it, we can learn all of that. So I just hope to continue to be open to that and be able to bless it when I see it in other people. So yeah, I mean, I felt the last about 9 years of my life since 2015 when I lost my mother. I was in such a good place in terms of what I've been able to do. I feel like, if I died now, I'd be more than happy, and having this kind of a life. So I just feel really, it's so wonderful to be able to seek the kind of things you've identified in your happy life. And I think most of all, to be kind of a difference maker, to be able to be someone who that this other person was able to kind of find a new life that they love, that you may have had some small part in that. So I just hope to continue to do that.
It sounds like you're on your own hero's journey and that it is very generative in nature and that it's helping others to be mindful of their own hero's journey. So
I don't know if you have a PhD in psychology, but what you just said would certainly earn you that I appreciate that. That was, yeah, beautiful, beautifully said. Beautifully said. That's yeah, that's kind of the way that I see it. One of Joseph Campbell's ideas about, the 12th, the final stage of what do we offer to other people? You talk about this being an elixir, from all these old stories, but most of the time it's a story. It's a story of our life and how we got through that to this place. And it's seeing that story in another person who has ADHD or another person who has recovered from some other kinds of issues in their lives or some trauma, that it's possible to do that. And then we're able to, um, you know, incorporate that into becoming our best self and being better at loving ourselves and other people.
Professor Smith, thank you for spending some time on this. If people want to find out more about your work or if you have some final thoughts you'd like to share, please do.
Yeah, would love to hear from anyone. That the Center for Applied Psychology and myself during COVID, we put together a workbook based on some of the best things we learned together in teaching positive psychology that is freely available as a PDF. Anyone's interested in that, I'd be happy to send that to you. You can send it to whoever you want to. Um, Beyond that, I just wish you the best. I like the saying of Viktor Frankl where he talks about, between stimulus and response, between the things that happen to us and the things that we do, there's this space, and in that space is our ability to choose to grow as people. And so I would just want people to know that whatever you're experiencing, it's possible for us to choose to be able to see and cultivate and experience the good in ourselves and other people.
Thank you, Professor Smith, and thank you, listeners, for journeying with us. Until next time, this has been the Positivity Matters podcast.